Your final School of Law speaker today. I'm Andy Sellars. I'm a clinical associate professor at the School of Law, and I'm the executive director of the BU MIT Student Innovations Law Clinic. I want to talk today about the ecosystem for information technology accountability, and in particular, how the government becomes aware of an issue in a consumer technology in the area of privacy and security. This stems specifically from the work that we do in the clinic. The Student Innovations Law Clinic represents currently enrolled students here at BU, as well as across the river at MIT, when they are doing innovative work and run into a legal issue. And you might assume that a lot of that work is in the entrepreneurial space, people creating new technologies. And that's true, we see a lot of clients in that area. But we've seen more and more over the years students coming to us wanting to do critical projects in technology, to critically examine how technology is working or the impacts that it's having in a particular community. And what we have noticed is that our clients that are interested in doing accountability-based work or auditing critical work in technology can have an enormous impact, often a nationally prolific impact as a student while here at BU or across the river as well. And this research began to try and unpack how that's been happening. This is joint work that I'm doing with Mike Spector, who's an assistant professor at Georgia Tech. Before Mike was at Georgia Tech, he was a student at MIT, and we represented him on a critical technology project, which I can talk about during the on-tap part of this day. But to begin with, I want to talk about this broad pattern we start to see. So Woody mentioned this very briefly in his talks, but he made a landmark contribution to the world of privacy law scholarship about 10 years ago when he observed that the FTC has become, sort of by default, our critical privacy regulator in the United States through specifically what's known as its Section 5 authority, its ability to police unfair and deceptive acts and practices by companies that are materially impactful to the public. And the way that this often plays out is that a company, in our case here, Zoom, makes a representation about its technology, and in particular, its privacy or security qualities. Back in April 2020, or really March 2020, Zoom did this. They said, we use end-to-end encryption as we were all dealing with the pandemic and trying to figure out what video conferencing platforms to use ours is end-to-end encryption. Only one problem, it wasn't. And the way that we knew that and found that out is that two independent journalists at The Intercept looked at that. They thought that that was a kind of a profound claim for the platform to be making, interrogated it, inspected the network traffic, talked to some experts, did their own analysis, and realized that, in fact, this claim was false. And a day later, Zoom posted a blog post essentially confessing to that fact. And that's all the FTC really needed to know in order to bring an enforcement action. You said this thing, it is material to the public, it is false, and therefore you are liable. This idea that an independent journalist or academic or advocate can be out there finding these things about technology is kind of known in the space. What hasn't been known until I think we looked at the question is just how often this is happening. And so Mike and I looked at all of the enforcement actions that are publicly known by the FTC since 2017. There's about 90 cases that were brought in our data set. And what we found is that over a quarter of them, 27% of all cases in privacy and security, follow this fact pattern. They are known to the FTC because an independent researcher took it upon themselves to examine the system. And in fact, if you remove cases where no investigation is necessary, for example, cases that involved companies that misstated that they were in the US-EU Privacy Shield, which required them to file paperwork with the FTC that they just didn't file, then that number actually grows to over a third. 36% of the remaining cases were discovered in this fact pattern. So conservatively, between a quarter and a third of all of our actions by our nationally leading privacy and security regulator only came to be because somebody somewhere took it upon themselves to analyze these systems in this way. So this, like it or not, and there's plenty of debate of what this is the right way to land in to regulate technology, this is the system we have. And so the question that we have to think about is how healthy is this ecosystem? And this is where we see some trouble. Since we've started doing this work in the clinic since 2016, it's improved in some interesting ways, but we routinely run into a common problem. Not, of course, with any clients we've directly represented. Every of them have been completely lawful in all respects, but you might imagine that a client may encounter these terms of service or these end user license agreements, these contracts that nobody reads, everyone clicks I agree and doesn't do anything about, but contain language that says you shall not reverse engineer, or you shall not scrape this website, or you shall not automatically examine this website. That's been true since these contracts have come into being. What's increasingly happening, though, is that major platforms, Facebook in 2020, the platform formerly known as Twitter earlier this summer, have been going after researchers for a breach of contract theory for doing this sort of accountability work. And so what I argue is that it is time for the FTC to recognize how important this is to their function, and time for them to use the tools that they have under Section 5 to go after these companies for this behavior. I have some particular theories about how these particular laws or approaches might apply here, which I can save for the on-tap part as well. Thank you.